I am very blessed. The Yom Kippur liturgy and music, the Torah and Haftarah readings always move me. But to be spending my first high holidays here with this congregation, with this clergy team as a rabbi, I am filled with gratitude, truly. And because it is Yom Kippur, I will make a confession. I was really looking forward to giving a sermon in Central Park. I was. Perhaps, like me, you were also eager to spend this sacred day in that sacred space. So while the park enjoys the nourishment of rain, I will do my best to bring the essence of that park to us this morning. Central Park is the heart of Manhattan, pumping oxygen and life throughout our congested borough. Genesis sings the Song of Eden, Vayatzmach Adonai Elohim min ha'adamah kol eitz nechad lemar'eh, and out of the ground God planted every tree beautiful to see. As we walk along the park's surrounding streets and avenues, leafy branches drape from above, beckoning us into our paradise. With just a few steps, the noisy, hard-edged city falls away, and we are immersed into 834 acres of woodlands, meadow, sloping lawns, and shady glen. Concrete is an afterthought. Our feet meet grass, mulch, earth. The air smells and tastes and feels different in the park. I feel different in the park. Do you? Scientific studies prove what we know to be true, that spending time in forested areas among nature lowers blood pressure and heart rate, improves attention span, and elevates mood. Sparse signage and meandering paths invite us to wander for the sake of wandering, to get lost without panic, to be somewhere instead of rushing to get somewhere. Here, even the speediest New Yorker slows down. The park brings out the best in us. As poet Mary Oliver writes, "Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, 'Stay a while.' The light flows from their branches, and they call again. 'It's simple,' they say, 'and you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light and to shine.'" The park invites connection. Strangers smile and chat. It was so lovely during Tashlich 10 days ago to see congregants who had never met get to know one another, discover they lived close to one another, walk home, and make plans to come to synagogue together in the future. Central Park is a space that welcomes us to practice what theologian Martin Buber described as I-thou encounters. Buber taught that most of the time our human interactions are I-it. We engage with people in a way that relates to our needs, objectifying them. For example, when we ask someone to hold the elevator, or when we say, "Excuse me," as we pass through by somebody's knees in order to get into our seat in our pews. The interaction might be polite or even friendly, but it's not a full encounter with that person. Buber encourages us to come to people without judgment or purpose, appreciating the entirety of who they are as unique human beings. He taught that in these moments, when we authentically engage with another, we encounter God. The atmosphere of the park doesn't ensure that every encounter is I-thou, but it does inspire that elevated interaction. Eden had its dangers, and so, of course, does Central Park. But overall, it is a sanctuary. Growing up at Temple Emanu-El in the 70s, it was the backyard to my synagogue home. In this building, I learned stories about Noah's Ark and Jonah's whale. And on the other side of the street, in the original children's zoo, I was invited into them. As an aside, for those of you who are old enough to remember playing in those biblical figures across the street, you should know that when the original children's zoo was decimated to build this one, everyone tried to save Jonah's whale. It was that much of an icon. And it was brought to the Rockaways, and it was waiting for repair when Hurricane Sandy washed it out to sea. Which is, I think, an appropriate biblical end to the whale, and maybe he's waiting there for Jonah now, but that is another sermon. That tiny corner of the park was the seed of my Central Park story, which has continued winding its way through my life. I'm sure that most of us here have our own Central Park stories. Adding to this park's magic is its shared delight. It holds millions of lifetimes of stories, even after people move away, even after people pass away. Some of these stories are captured on the plaques affixed to many of the park's benches. They have become their own New York City literary genre. In just a few words, they reveal something intimate about those who wrote their messages by reaching out to all. Like the plaque that reads, "For the rescue dogs of 9/11, loyalty and duty beyond our comprehension." Or, "Happy 50th, Mark. With joy we live to see the day when we could be married. Love your adoring husband, Ron." The plaques reflect Buber's urging to bond with another person by cherishing their unique stories. We are relational creatures. We read one plaque and realize we are surrounded by opportunities for connection. So let me just read a couple more. Bedstafar, may the many Danish stories that you tell me on this bench help me to grow up to be just like you. Love your grandson, Sebastian. Sketch here with Jim Cedarine, who knew himself, family, and the park through making art, 1947 to 2020. We may not know Danish or like to paint, but we know what it is to feel love, loss, gratitude. We read these plaques and connect with someone we likely have never met. The plaques make invisible lines of connection visible. For example, Lou Young, a Parks Department worker known as the Bench Guy, has lovingly affixed the park's 7,800 bench plaques and continues to tend them through wear and weather damage. Several years ago, Lou noticed a funny coincidence. He was installing a plaque dedicated to someone with his name. He looked more carefully and realized it was for him. Louis Young, for his care and dedication to the park since 1985. Lou had already left a deeply impactful and lasting imprint on this park and on the lives of all of us who visit. But a grateful donor wanted the story of Lou's care for Central Park and its people to be made public. Now, only a small percentage of the park stories will ever be recorded, and those are mostly stories of people with resources and privilege. For example, how much do we know about the indigenous Lenape people who once hunted beavers in the lake where we float on rowboats? And New York City buried the story of an entire community. Inside the perimeter of the park from West 82nd to 89th Streets is the site of Seneca Village, a mostly African-American settlement established in 1825. 3 decades later, the community's homes, churches, schools, and cemeteries were razed so that Central Park could be constructed. Some of its ruins still remain. A temporary exhibit of signs sharing Seneca's history is only promised to be standing through this fall. I urge all of us, if we haven't yet, to go there, pay tribute, educate ourselves, and extend that community's story into ours. Human beings are not the only ones whose stories live in the park. Scholar and mystic Rav Kook taught that every part of creation sings its song, that every tree and sprout and leaf of grass utters something meaningful in the silence. Central Park's 20,000 trees make it what it is. They provide us with shade and oxygen and natural beauty and so much more. And yet most of the time, we barely perceive them. Think about it. We tend to consider people and animals as players in the world, but trees, they blur into the background. There's a name for this. It's a phenomenon known as plant blindness. It's our inability to recognize plant life and appreciate its fundamental role in our world. Judaism has always sensed this tendency and urged us to recognize the significance of trees. We are directed to the sacred beauty in person, animal, and tree alike, and then to offer blessing. Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam, shekacha lo ba'olamo. Blessed are you, God, for these wonders filling our world. It's no surprise that we need this prodding. We've been oblivious as long as we've been human. Adam and Eve lived in their Eden without distraction, no tennis courts or concerts, no cell phones. There weren't even any other people. But even they didn't absorb the splendor of their surroundings. In shame, they ducked behind branches to hide from God, missing the fact that God was right there among the very trees they were using for cover. Martin Buber would say that Adam and Eve's inability to recognize God's presence was a result of their objectification of the trees, their I-it mentality. They only regarded the trees as there to serve them. Buber believed that for us to be our fullest selves, we should strive for I-thou encounters not only with people, but also with nature. When we relate to a tree simply for our purposes or pleasure, for fruit, or for wood, or for its color, we overlook the tree as a whole being. Trees' intrinsic value isn't dependent on us, our imagination, our moods, our needs. When we consider the fullness of a tree, Buber taught, we become bound up in a mutual relationship with it. It has to do with us, and we have to do with it. That bond leads us to God and to more godly behavior. To express this philosophy through a story, a student of Rav Kook was walking with his teacher in a field when he mindlessly pulled a leaf off a tree. Rav Kook shuddered and gently explained, I never simply pluck a leaf or a blade of grass or any living thing unless I have to. The student later said, "From that time on, I began to feel a strong sense of compassion for all things." The Torah directly encourages us to relate to trees as we relate to people. We read in Deuteronomy, "Ki adam eitz hasadeh," the tree of the field is like a human being. Science reveals this to be true. Like us, trees hold stories. They literally embody their narratives. Their rings reveal their age and the struggle or ease they faced each year due to the climate. Their knots are visible scars of healed wounds and permanent loss. Their very shape illustrates relationships. Tree branches grow in directions that leave room for their neighbors. Like us, trees share stories. We might not hear trees talk, but they are always communicating. They emit gas and other scent signals, warning each other about dangers, like hungry animals or parasites. Like us, trees pass on stories. Dying trees, even dead trees, become home and food to other plants and creatures. They nourish the soil. They live on through the environment. Ki adam eitz hasadeh, the tree of the field is like a human being. This verse can also be translated, the human being is like a tree of the field. On this sacred day, when we shake ourselves out of our self-absorption and vow to do a better job of living with compassion, let's hear this verse as an aspiration. Let's teach ourselves and our children to live as trees do instinctively. Trees have a keen awareness of others' needs. There is no hoarding of resources. Through massive underground networks of roots and fungi, they share nutrients and water with family, with friends, and even with competitors. Let's live with this generosity. We only need what we need. Let's make sure others have what they need. Trees value each other. Older, sturdier trees nourish those that are sick. Because if those weaker plants die, large gaps in the tree canopy would put all the trees at risk. Let's honor every single person as having an essential role in our world. Trees do best in community. On its own, a tree exists at the whim of climate. As a forest, trees create ecosystems that moderate temperature, store water, protect all living things. Let's spend less time working to get ourselves and our families ahead and devote more time working with our community for tikkun olam, for repairing this entire world. The trees in the park are starting to change color. Sukkot is almost here. The rabbis discovered continuity in the dying that autumn brings. They taught that we are like the date palm tree of which nothing is wasted. Its dates are for eating. Its lulavim are for blessing. Its fronds are for thatching roofs. Its fibers are for ropes. Its thick trunks for building. So it is with us. We all remain a part of this world, even when we are gone. In a moment, we will be saying Yizkor for people who are no longer sitting beside us, but whose presence fills our lives. This is the way of God and nature. Poet and gardener Ross Gay expressed this truth in a poem, A Small Needful Fact. It's dedicated to New Yorker Eric Garner, who pleaded, "I can't breathe," while dying in a policeman's illegal chokehold. A small needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for the Parks and Rec Horticulture Department, which means perhaps that with his very large hands, perhaps in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants, which most likely, some of them in all likelihood, continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe. Eric's story lives on, not only in news articles, not only in the memorial plaque dedicated to him that stands in a New York City park, not only in the hearts of his family and friends, but in the greenery and life and air of this city. His story is inextricably bound up in ours. As we step into the new year, let's step outside of ourselves into our best selves. Outside into the beauty of this magnificent world and marvel. We are threads in this web of connection, a symbiotic, sacred unity, binding all parts of God's creation throughout time and space. It looks like tomorrow will be a sunny day. Maybe we'll see each other in the park. I'll be waiting for you, sitting on a bench with a plaque gifted from Sydney and John. A million stories passing by, some new, but most are old. Come sit on our bench a while and watch a few unfold.